From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Tracie. Welcome to Capitol Journal. This coming Monday at 2 o'clock, the Alabama legislature will convene for a special session called to redraw Alabama's congressional lines. The Joint Reapportionment Committee met again this week for its final public hearing on the issue, which took up an entire afternoon here at the State House. Lawmakers heard from concerned citizens and interest groups, discussed a handful of proposed maps among themselves, and even received a letter from the Attorney General on his thoughts about redistricting. One thing we didn't see in the hearing was a final map that Republicans in the majority are expected to produce by Monday. State Representative Chris Pringle, who co-chairs the committee and led most of the proceedings, explained that the panel had received hundreds of proposed maps in a small amount of time and that he was moving as fast as he can in a very compressed window.
I can understand that the deadline for plan submittal was July 7th. How many plans have been submitted? And how will we know which plan?
We are actively processing plans as fast as possible, but there was an overwhelming number sent into the committee from all over, from France, from New Zealand, and all over out of state. Right now we're trying to consolidate and get the plans from Alabama residents to you as fast as possible. We're just overwhelmed. One of the problems, some of the plans are not compatible with Maptitude. So we have to get the plans, we have to get them inloaded in our computer into Maptitude and then process them so we can run numbers.
Democrats on the committee complained that receiving and passing a new map on Monday wouldn't allow time for lawmakers or the public to scrutinize the plan.
And I'm very concerned about that. While we talked about all the maps we have and all the data that's been submitted, there is data that has not been submitted. And I would really hope that we could get that data before we get to the floor.
When you're talking about putting a map together, are you talking about you all as chair will put the map together, or we as a committee will have input in that process? What does that look like? I understand the being overwhelmed, but we also knew that we had this deadline.
In this very compressed time frame that we've been working under, less than 21 days? We've been doing everything we can. We are going to release a map based on what we've gathered here today, the input from everybody. We will send it to members of the committee as soon as possible, as soon as we get our analysis of the maps and the numbers together. And then Monday at 10 o'clock, we'll meet here again to vote. And everybody will have input at that time.
I just want to go on record that this process, while giving the appearance of being open and transparent, is everything but. And then when we vote on this map, I'm going to be obligated to vote against it because I don't have, there's nothing for me to share with my constituents. There's nothing for me to vet, to know if it's compliant. And, you know, one of the rules one of the guidelines or amendments that we propose required some analysis of it. So when do we get into any independent analysis to see that if it even remotely satisfies the Voting Rights Act?
I'll be speaking more with Representative Chris England about this issue later in the show. During the hearing, members of the public were invited to comment on the proposed new maps or just the issue in general. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith reports.
In its meeting that lasted 3 hours and 35 minutes, the Permanent Legislative Committee on Reapportionment made some progress toward its work to redraw the 2021 congressional map.
We finally have adopted a set of guidelines that the committee can use to draw maps.
They also held 2 public hearings that gave voice to nearly 30 members of the general public. The first hearing captured general comments on the reapportionment process.
I don't have a map. I don't know what maps you have, but I would love to see Dothan and Houston County stay in line with Montgomery and all the communities that were involved going up the southeast edge of Alabama.
I'm 16. I'm in the 11th grade. My question is this map, or if this map is not passed nor acknowledged by the state of Alabama, what rights and opportunity will be at risk for my youth as future voters?
And several Black Republicans wanted their perspectives acknowledged.
And I really like the opinion of our forefathers, but they started with we the people. And we the people have been left out, and particularly me. I vote Republican.
I love this state. I love my party. It is unfair that we talk about redistricting based on colors.
That stereotypes of all black voters are not Democrats. And it's disrespectful to black Republicans across the state and across the country. I hope that you all take us and our opinions into account when drawing district lines.
We have to unite. The Republicans and the Democrats have to come together because we live together.
The second public hearing focused on the 4 maps currently before committee members. The proponents of those maps say each satisfies the United States Supreme Court's requirement to create 2 majority black voting districts. For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
Of course, the whole reason the legislature must redraw the districts is that the Supreme Court upheld a lower court's ruling that the current districts, passed in 2021, were likely in violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That ruling came about as a result of a lawsuit filed by Evan Milligan, along with other groups. A Montgomery native, Milligan has been a consistent presence as this process has moved forward. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports.
We're involved in redistricting and have been involved in redistricting since 2021, right after the census data was released.
Evan Milligan wears many hats: concerned citizen, executive director of Alabama Forward, to name a few. Add spectator to that list because he plans on watching the upcoming special session dealing with redrawing Alabama's districts in person.
We were hoping for the state to choose maps that comply with the Voting Rights Act, and really worked hard with our coalition members to present information on the front end for them to consider about as far as maps that would comply with the Voting Rights Act and what those would look like, both at the state level and also in terms of the congressional map.
Milligan says lawmakers chose a map which violated rules established by the Voting Rights Act, causing his organization and others to take steps.
We filed suit in federal court. That case was litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court. We won at both the lower court level and also at the Supreme Court level. So now the stage that we're at is the court has agreed that the state of Alabama did violate the Voting Rights Act with the prior map that was adopted.
The U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision saying Alabama needs to fix this issue.
And our position as plaintiffs in this case is that we have an opportunity to create a map that features 2 opportunity districts where black Alabamians have an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice.
The next step after this public hearing, the start of the special session, one Milligan says he'll pay close attention to.
We'll also be watching what happens next week at the once the special session starts on Monday. The plaintiffs in our case, our family members, our fellow members of Alabama Forward, our attorneys, we're all very interested, and we would hope that the people of Alabama are interested.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
The Alabama State School Board met this week and received the latest testing results for 2nd through 8th grade. Some good news. All grades showed improvement in math scores. Most grades showed improvement in English language arts, but not all. The test results from this past spring showed 54% of second graders testing at grade level proficiency in English language arts. That's up from 5 points in the spring of 2022. The state's third graders demonstrated 54% proficiency. That's down 1 point from last year. The number that stood out, however, was 12,843. That's the number of third graders who are not proficient as of this spring. Under the Alabama Literacy Act, beginning this next school year, students who cannot read proficiently by third grade would not advance to fourth grade. State Superintendent Eric Mackey pointed out that the true number at risk for being held back would be much less than that, perhaps even half to a third, because of summer reading camps and personalized learning plans to get students up to speed and advance to fourth grade. The board also elected Tracie West of Auburn as its new vice president. I'll speak with her about some of these results later in the show. Also meeting this week was the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission. Back in June, the panel awarded 21 licenses to companies applying to grow, transport, and distribute medical marijuana products. But those were put on hold after complaints about the scoring process surfaced. John McMillan, executive director of the commission, said scoring issues are being resolved and that the body will be ready to reissue those licenses by August 10th. But not all commissioners are in agreement.
Well, there's controversy. I mean, every state that's tried this has run into all kinds of problems. And I accept full responsibility for asking the universities to get involved. I thought to minimize that, we would have the schools to have medical schools and pharmacies to participate. We asked UAB, we asked Auburn, we asked Alabama State because it's the largest historically black university, and we asked South Alabama. And only South Alabama felt that they could assist us in this program. And we want to try to get some independent evaluators to make recommendations to the board. And these are not high school kids. These are college professors. These are retired business people. And we did keep it anonymous because we didn't want them to be pressured into voting for one person or the other. And so we've gone through evaluation progress. Every state has used evaluators. Now, the state of Florida used their commission. They were tied up in litigation for several years. Most states have had litigation afterwards because let's just be simple. This is about money. Everybody who's involved in this thinks there's going to be a lot of money to be made in this. So let's don't feel sorry for the people about not getting as much money as they think they're going to get. Let's talk about the patients, the cancer patients, the children with seizures, the people who need this medication, and that's what we're trying to push forward with.
Looking now to Washington. It was a busy week for the Alabama delegation in the nation's capital. Congressman Mike Rogers, who chairs the powerful House Armed Services Committee, guided the National Defense Authorization Act to passage on the House floor. In total, the bill authorizes $874.2 billion in defense spending. It also includes a 5.2% pay raise for military personnel, the largest in a generation. The bill includes policy parameters that might sound familiar. It would roll back the Pentagon's recent policy of paying for service members or their family members to travel to other states to seek abortions. It would also stop any new construction related to a Space Command permanent headquarters, which is a move meant to stop the Air Force from awarding the command to Colorado Springs instead of Huntsville. The bill passed along party lines, with the state's 6 Republicans voting in favor and lone Democrat Terry Sewell voting against it. Rogers said the bill, which now goes to the Senate, bolsters national defense, including the threat from China.
NDAA provides our warfighters the resources and authorities they need to provide for the defense of our nation and the security of our allies around the world. That's critical because the threats we face today are more complex and serious than they've been at any point in the last 30 years. Topping that list is an increasingly aggressive China. Ranking Member Smith and I recently led a bipartisan delegation to Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. What was clear from our meetings was that the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party is real and represents the most pressing national security challenge we've faced in decades. The FY24 NDAA was built with that underlying goal of deterring the Chinese Communist Party in mind. It provides new authorities and speeds the fielding of innovative new technologies like artificial intelligence and hypersonics that will give us the advantage in a conflict with China.
That Pentagon abortion travel issue remained in the news this week as U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville has continued his hold on military promotion confirmations until the Pentagon reverses its decision. President Biden even criticized Tuberville from overseas, calling the hold, quote, irresponsible. Tuberville defended the move, saying such a serious policy change deserves a vote in Congress.
But this is a two-way street. We can sit down and talk. We can move the policy back the way it was, and let's vote on it. Let's let the American people's representatives up here actually vote on it. I'm not going to allow a dictatorship in the White House and the Pentagon. That's not what this country is about. It's about the Constitution. Okay? It's about the Constitution, doing it the right way. We've had a policy for 35 years in the military. Joe Biden actually voted for it 35 years ago. It passed, it went in, but now he wants to change it with a memo. We're not doing that.
Tuberville also defended and clarified his previous comments about white nationalists serving in the military. Asked about the issue on Caitlin Collins' new show on CNN, Tuberville said that characterizing white nationalists as racist was a matter of opinion. He later clarified those comments in interviews with state media, saying white nationalists are racist, but that Democrats too often try to characterize all Republicans as white nationalists.
Since I've been here, that's what they use. They use against us, white extremists, white nationalists. If you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, if you're a Christian, and if you're a Trump supporter, that's what they call you. I do not want them to put us in that same category. I understand white nationalists are racist, and we don't need them in the military. But I was trying to get to the point where get us out of it. You know, the people in the Republican Party are not white nationalists. We are Americans that believe in the American way, our Constitution. And so I'm sick of the Democrats throwing that at us. And so they'll misconstrue everything that you do up here. I might not have explained it the way it should have been explained. Listen, I am against racism of all forms and fashions. We do not need racism in this country. You know, and I've been in coaching all my life. I understand it. I've been around a lot of minority kids most of my life. But Republicans, conservative, Christians, and Trump fans do not need to be put in that category, but because when they need something, they're going to go right at that and make sure that they categorize you as a racist in any possible way that they can. And I'm basically sick of it.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is State Representative Chris England from Tuscaloosa. Mr. England, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, it was a long hearing with this redistricting committee, the reapportionment committee. 4 hours, 5 hours almost. Lots of voices heard, lots of discussion between members, and obviously these maps going back and forth. What were your general takeaways of what happened today and where we are in the process?
We saw Alabama today. You know, we were kind of all over the place. But when you invite the public in and give the public the opportunity to vet maps and be transparent about the process, you know, this is what you're going to get. And I enjoy it. I mean, that's one of the best parts about being down here is to engage the public and hear public opinion about things. Mm-hmm. And it's just unfortunate to me that throughout all this transparency, these two public hearings, that the actual map that may be adopted by the committee on Monday will be one that's not vetted by the public. So I enjoy these sorts of things, and I think public involvement creates a better product at the end of the day. And I just wish that we had a process that was designed to get the public input on the final map.
Yeah, I heard you expressing frustration there toward the end about, I guess the plan is to come back on Monday at 10 o'clock before the session begins for the committee to, I guess, vote on whatever final map. But you're right, you will probably see it, but it may not be disseminated publicly. Is there a better way to do that? I mean, just with the time crunch?
Yeah, I do, because the maps that we all saw today were submitted prior to our first public hearing. And then we had a deadline we gave the public for public submissions of maps. And I think it would have been a better process had our Republican supermajority, you know, give us some idea of what maps they were looking at or what their ideas were or what some of their issues were. Because as it stands now, when we come in on Monday and the committee meets, which, by the way, this meeting on Monday was not announced. Like, we found out about a meeting on Monday today. We also found out that there will be a map presented for our consideration on Monday today. So I think the way to fix that process and to be as transparent as possible is to do what everybody else in the public was doing, giving us your ideas, giving us the map so we can vet it and get some ideas about what public thought about the communities of interest in it, the splits in it, how the counties are split, our precincts being split, or get an idea of what the Republicans believe is the appropriate black voting age population in districts, so we can start kind of vetting it and getting an idea of where this process is headed. We've had 2 public hearings, and we're really at step 1 because we have no idea where it's going.
Yeah, and so that's the magic words, right? BVAP, Black Voting Age Population, and you're supportive of the plaintiff's map, right?
Yeah.
The Milligan map.
Yes.
At the end of the day, do you think that the Republicans and that the committee as a whole will pass something close to that? Will it look close to that with maybe a few deviations, or do you think they're going towards something radically different?
I don't really have an idea, and I wish I did, because the political person in me, somebody that's been in Montgomery for a while, thinks it's going to be something completely different, something that's going to push it toward the extremes to force it back into court and make them, eventually, I say this all the time, if Alabama has the opportunity to do something wrong, we're going to do it better than everybody else. Well, I think that's where this is headed. I mean, for one, the map that we're going to vote on hasn't been seen by anybody, hasn't been vetted. 2, there's not going to be any independent analysis of it because there's not any time. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we get finished meeting on on Monday at 10, then we're going to start session that afternoon. So there's really no opportunity for the public to comment on what could ultimately be the map that passes, that goes to the Supreme Court. And for me, if I were on the district court or the Supreme Court and watching this process play out like it did in 2021, that ultimately ended up in an unconstitutional map, I'd already have questions in my mind about, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting a different result. Well, Alabama just did the exact same thing they did in 2021, passed a map that nobody had seen before. It resulted in an unconstitutional map, and then lo and behold, after we told you the map was unconstitutional, you go back and you do it again. So, I mean, I don't know. I for one, would have started off opening the door with a process that included you getting an opportunity to see where we were headed.
Well, it's kind of this question between whatever the Republicans ultimately come up with, and I guess we'll see on Monday.
Yeah.
But opportunity versus majority, right? And a majority black district versus one that's 40s, that kind of thing. And look, the Supreme Court didn't mandate two majority black districts, but they did acknowledge that it was possible, and it said basically something close to it. So I guess, kind of getting to what you were just saying, if they decide to do, let's say leaving the 7th at above 50, but the second district maybe, mid 40s, do you think that's a risk at the court? Do you think the court could possibly say, okay, you didn't do what we actually expected you to do? Or what is that magic number? I mean, I guess it's hard to say. Is it 45? Is it 48? How close do you have to get?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't think there's a magic number. And for me, I've maintained this from the very beginning. Like, I want something that satisfies the court's order, the district court's directive in creating a map that satisfies the Voting Rights Act. A constitutional congressional map that creates an equal opportunity for people of color to elect their candidate of choice, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily think there's a magic number. But however, it's difficult for me to square the court essentially saying that racially polarized voting occurs in Alabama, which creates these candidates or these elected officials, and then not have a district that's racially polarized. To me, I don't know how you do that. So I think as we go below a black or a majority minority district, the further away we get to that, I think we're probably pushing the line a little bit. But what's acceptable for me is a district that's sustainable, obviously, that produces the desired result, electing a candidate of choice, and it performs. So that means that it's lasts. Like, we put numbers together that can match population shifts, deviations from top, from the center. So when people move, we also know that that district will still continue to produce from years to come, just like the 7th Congressional District does now. So if we're working to produce 2 districts that are sustainable, that perform, then I have a very difficult time seeing how the further you get away from it being majority-minority, it continuing to work over the years.
It was kind of dramatic here at the end of the hearing. You had this letter from the Attorney General surface, and the counsel for the committee read it at length, and I was just kind of listening and paying attention, like, wow, okay, this is really interesting. Basically making the argument that the plaintiff's map could be unconstitutional, against the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. He also talks about how the plaintiffs previous to all this litigation, supported, quote unquote, opportunity districts. Do you think the Attorney General's involvement here is going to be instructive toward the committee? Do you think that it's persuasive in terms of the members? Do you think they're going to listen to this letter pretty closely?
I do. Just to be quite frank, it was a tough loss at the Supreme Court level for the state. And the letter reads sort of like relitigating some of the facts of the case to reemphasize some of the arguments that were made. And quite frankly, some of those arguments were not successful at the district court level and Supreme Court level. That's obviously why we're back here trying to draw new maps. But also, though, again, if the phrase that pays at this point is black voting age population, obviously taking up examples from the arguments that where black voting age population is much lower than 50% in a district, you want to continue to reiterate that, because if ultimately the map that's produced on Monday does that, well, our attorney, essentially the state attorney general's office, has tacitly agreed with it and endorsed it with a letter that went to the members of the committee. So you may see something that matches some of the arguments that were made. But again, I'll caution anybody from taking that position because it was rejected. And I think the Supreme Court was pretty clear that if racially polarized voting occurs in Alabama, it needs to be as close to 50% or above as possible.
And I remember talking about, really, as this process began, when these rulings were coming down, I guess it was before the Supreme Court had its ruling. We would always talk about, could this process end up with Alabama not even having one majority black district, right? And even if you bring the 7th down to 48, 49. And so the other side of that is, you're right. It's a risk. If they pass a plan like that, it's very possible the district court and the Supreme Court could reject it. If that happens, my understanding is it would go to a special master, and essentially a lawyer somewhere on the court would draw our maps for us.
Yeah, and I think we forget that at one point back when we were initially litigating this case, we were close to having a special master then until the Supreme Court stepped in. And there were actually discussions between counsel on both sides about who they would agree upon if, in fact, we got to the point where a special master was necessary. So I think in this situation, if, there's several outcomes. We could actually, a miracle could occur. We could come here on Monday and a map be produced and we all say, that's a fantastic map. We all pass it. It goes to the court and the court says, blesses it, and we have a map. That's probably not going to happen. So let's look at the alternatives. The other alternative is we don't pass anything. We can't agree on anything, and it goes to a special master to be withdrawn. Or the submission from the legislature doesn't satisfy the court's order in their opinion, and they reject it and write and draw it anyway. But ultimately, that map that comes from a special master, correct me if I'm wrong, could still be challenged and go back to the Supreme Court for further review.
Absolutely. People forget about that. Like, whatever happens, there could still be legal challenges. And it almost sounds like the Attorney General would be ready to challenge if y'all passed the plaintiff's map, a week from now. It sounds like he might almost be ready to challenge that on the 14th Amendment grounds. And I guess going back to the whole opportunity districts and what the percentages are, it's still a conservative court. And really, if you flip one vote, if you flip, I suppose, Kavanaugh's vote, that's a winner. So, maybe that's the temptation to really, go in and have these less than 50% black districts.
Yeah, I mean, it's been remanded back to the district court with instructions for us to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And that's, while it may sound specific when you discuss it, it's pretty general and vague in its application, meaning that there are plenty of different ways you can go and there are plenty of different avenues you can end up on. And for us now to watch this play out over the next 5, we meet on, I guess, 10 o'clock on Monday to adopt a map we've never seen. And then we go into the process where you're going to see members pushing maps of their own and ultimately one Republican map. It's going to be fascinating to watch this play out. But, Alabama's, we can always talk about we dare defend our rights, but over the course of history, we've also been the make me state. So I fully anticipate, as we go through this process, that I don't see us coming up, I don't necessarily see us coming to an agreement on something, and I've said it before, I believe that ultimately a special master draws this map and it goes back to the Supreme Court for further review.
Well, a lot of folks are paying attention, not just here in Montgomery, but also in Washington, D.C., of what in the world is going to happen. Thank you so much for your time and explaining some of these things, and I guess we'll see you on Monday.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Thanks again. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is Tracie West, Vice President of the Alabama State Board of Education. Ms. West, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. This is such a privilege and an honor.
And I should have said newly elected Vice President.
Yes.
This happened this week, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And I was hoping you could sort of explain what that role is, because I know the governor is by virtue of her office the president,
yes,
right, of the board, but the vice president is kind of the leader of among those members.
Yes, right. So we have an 8-member board made up of districts in the state, and then obviously our governor is the board chair. I'll be facilitating the meetings when she's not there, working with Dr. Mackey and the leadership team and the board to prepare our agendas. Obviously, meeting with legislators and leaders around the state to communicate the board's mission for the state. And really, I consider my role sort of a liaison to the public for what we're doing at the State Department of Education and the many goals that we're achieving and move us forward in a more efficient manner. So I have to really credit the board because they have really pulled together the last few years since I've been on the board and been working very hard with Dr. Mackey to achieve the things the agendas that the governor has put forward and the legislature.
Mm-hmm. Talk about your background coming into this. I remember from the campaign you talking about having a business background.
Yes.
But also at the local school board level. So I wonder how that sort of instructs your leadership style coming into this role.
Absolutely. I actually think my business background brings some strength to the role. So I ran a small business still am in business, but a small retail shipping business for 21 years. And if you've ever worked in the retail industry, you do everything, and you work very long hours. So I was a member of my Chamber of Commerce, an officer for that board, worked hard with my local city council and mayor, volunteered my time in school because I had children in public school, and so the mayor and council asked if I would like to serve, first of all, on a board for the Lee County Youth Development Center. And that center houses children who have very severe needs. Many of them are there as wards of the state, or they've made very poor choices and they have to be at the center and out of a traditional classroom. So I sort of cut my teeth on educating children that are difficult at best. And from that point forward, I applied to be a member of the local school board for Auburn City Schools, and I served there for almost 10 years while I was also operating a business. And that's strictly volunteer. You're not paid for that position. I never expected that. It was an opportunity to give back to a community that I love. And in serving in that role, I discovered that the State Department of Education, I felt like, was very disconnected from the local classroom. I didn't feel like they were necessarily there to serve us, but we were there to serve them. And so I ran for the position with really no support, and was fortunate enough to get in my car and drive around 14 counties and be elected to the position. And it has been my great honor to serve the last 4 years, and I'm now entering into a second term. And I think having that business background, that urgency every day, that when my feet hit the floor, I've got clients to serve. If I don't work, I don't eat. And so we have 750,000 school students in our classrooms every day. 750,000. You really have to take that number in. They have parents. They have grandparents, aunts and uncles. They deserve our very, very best. And so for me, every day I'm thinking about the children and the students. I have no other agenda but their achievement.
Well, let's talk about achievement and talk about instruction, specifically reading.
Yes.
This was a big topic at the board meeting this week, and we reported on this. The ACAP scores are in, and this is what we're all following, especially as it pertains to reading and math.
Right.
And some maybe promising numbers, but they also sort of jumped off the page in terms of if the Literacy Act was in full effect, meaning the accountability portions were in full effect, then several thousand would have been held back possibly.
Correct.
You had this number jump out like 12,000, but that's without the mitigating opportunities during the summer, getting kids back up to speed. So I guess my question is, what do parents need to know about what's coming with the Literacy Act? And, is there too much fear in some of these headlines?
Right. Well, we never want to use fear as a tactic to motivate our families and our students, but we do need to be completely transparent about the law. So the State Board of Education does not set law, but we do set policy that has to adhere to the law. We have to follow the law. And so right now, we are communicating to our families that in this last assessment, we had roughly 12,500, let's just use that round number, students that did not score proficient in reading.
These are third graders rising to the fourth grade.
These, correct. So there are second graders that were assessed that are now coming into the third grade.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, you're correct. Third graders that would not have moved forward to the fourth grade. So we test second and third grade.
Right.
So I want to make that clear. But if the law were in place and we were retaining students this fall, we would. That's a big number. That's a big number. And frankly, we don't have the third grade teachers nor the space to retain that many students. The law specifically states that there are provisions there that teachers and students can work together and develop what's called a portfolio. So when we identify a student in second grade that is not proficient in second grade, teachers need to start building that body of work that provide evidence that they are moving forward. Even if they didn't pass the ACAP assessment with proficiency, they can use what's called a portfolio, that body of work where the teacher works together with the student, with the principal in the building, with the parents participating, and we provide evidence and validate that the child is ready to move forward. Mm-hmm. So our concern as a state board right now is that we're communicating with every single parent who has a child right now coming into the third grade. The school year is about to begin. If that child is not ready and reading proficiently, we've got from now until the end of the school year to really move them forward. And so without fear, but with a sense of urgency, we've got to get the work done. And what the State Board is asking is really a ground-up approach to leadership. It has to happen in the local school. They've got to know their numbers. Those numbers are out and they're being validated. The board will receive final numbers at the end of this month. But we know the schools that are struggling. We know the exact number of students that are not proficient. We know who those students are. If I had a heat map, I could show you where the issues are. And every school has them, but some in a more concentrated number. The numbers are higher. And so we really need to focus and bring all of our resources to bear in those schools that need us the most.
Well, and it comes to mind that this law, the accountability proportion, has already been delayed once.
That's right.
It would have been in effect,
That's
except
right.
maybe for COVID.
And thank goodness
what the legislature did.
it's been delayed.
But you're probably going to hear talk about it again. I mean, when they see numbers like that, this next legislative session, you're probably going to hear about it again. But I want to remind folks that the whole point here, what we're talking about is a child can't read proficiently, and that there's evidence out there, there's research out there showing if you can't read by the 3rd grade going into 4th grade, it really creates problems down the road with staying in school and other societal problems.
That's right. And our children that need to read the most are in areas that really don't have a lot of opportunities. You know, we've got children in rural Alabama, in the Black Belt, that need highly trained teachers to go in and help them and coaches. And that's where we're putting our resources. Because we know if they are not reading on grade level by the 3rd grade, the chances of them having a job and earning potential in the future, it dwindles greatly.
Or even graduating high school.
That's correct. And it's a shame that we would ever graduate a child from high school without a plan for future employment or future education.
Yeah, it's just that we hear so much talk about, well, you're holding them back, and that's so, negative and all that. It's like, well, I can't read, and so there's a reason for it.
No, I applaud the Alabama Literacy Act and the legislature for passing the act. It's probably the most robust piece of legislation around reading in the country. And I would say the same for numeracy. We're hearing that from other states. So I applaud the act, and our job now as a State Department of Education is with urgency have our superintendents, our principals, our teachers moving these children forward with the tools that we're providing for them. Local boards of education need to be having the discussion at the board table. How many schools do we have in our district? How many elementary school students do we have reading proficiently? We need to be looking at the number of kindergartners coming in, 1st graders, 2nd graders, and 3rd graders. We need to know at the local level what teachers are not letters trained, are not prepared to assist those children in moving forward. We need our communities to be involved. I know there's a huge great effort going on in Wilcox County right now where clergy have gotten involved, parents are involved, and they are taking the resources that we're providing from the State Department of Education, and they are literally on the ground talking to parents and getting those children prepared for the school year. That's just one small example, but I think that if we can have a ground-up grassroots effort reading initiative in our local communities, we can do this. I see that local board being very important right now. The State Department can only do so much. The State Board of Education can provide excellent policy. We can facilitate wonderful resources and programs. But if that local board does not take action with that local superintendent, we won't cross the finish line, and we will retain more students than we need to. I think that number is truly around 6,000, 6,500. We know that through summer reading camps, we can move about half of the children off of that role of being non-proficient. But I want every child reading proficiently.
Absolutely. Well, while I've got you, only got a little time left, but I wanted to ask you about the legislature. You mentioned y'all invited over the House Majority Leader and House Minority Leader to kind of talk to the board and facilitate some better communication. I know historically there's kind of been some friction there, so I wanted to ask how that's going. Do you feel like there's better communication between the Board of Education and the legislature now?
Well, I cannot speak for every board member. I really can speak for myself. But I have an excellent relationship with the legislators in my district. I call them, they reach out to me. We have a great relationship. When I came into this role 5 years ago, I really didn't understand why there was some disconnect there. I've made an effort when I came into office to walk over and meet the Speaker of the House and give him my business card and ask him to please reach out to me anytime he had a question about my role or my support or lack of support for something that they might be working on. And so my hope is that those relationships are improving, that we're building that trust. I understand why they might not be trusting of us, and I accept, even though maybe I wasn't on the board when things happen, I accept responsibility for anything that's been negative between the legislature and the State Board of Education. And I think Dr. Mackey has also worked very hard at building those relationships and that trust. And so we have to have each other work together on behalf of our students. That number again, 750,953 students last year, 48,000 educators. Those households depend on us to work together. And so I never have walked into a classroom and looked at children and thought, wow, are they Republican or Democrat? You know, they're children and they're young people, and they deserve the best every day of us to provide a future for them.
Well, congratulations again on your election, and thanks so much for your time today coming on the show.
Absolutely. It's been an honor, and I'd love to come back anytime.
Sure thing. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is Steve Murray, Director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Steve, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Todd. Always good to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you on because I really wanted to give you an opportunity to clear up some of what I think is some misinformation out there revolving around this program in June as part of a series of programs about contributions of LGBT individuals in Alabama history. It's received some criticism from some in the legislature. One I had on here last week, Senator Chris Elliott. But you've sent some information now to lawmakers clarifying exactly what this was and what it wasn't. Can you kind of get us up to speed?
Sure thing. This afternoon we sent a letter to all the members to be sure they all had the same information, and we're hearing directly from the archives and stating that we fully respect the legislature's authority and responsibility to appropriate funds, and appropriations have become part of this conversation. But the letter also provides information about the fact that this program, which happened on June 15th, was part of our monthly Food for Thought series, which for more than 30 years has brought in a different speaker every month with some expertise in some area of Alabama history and provided an opportunity for the public to hear from that person. And in June, our topic was LGBTQ history in Alabama. It was a program that spoke to history that was actually dating back 50 years ago when some student organizations at Auburn University and the University of Alabama started organizing members of the LGBTQ community there and an early Birmingham-based organization that was providing social services. So it was very much a traditional talk in the way of a speaker coming in who's done research on a topic and presenting that historical research in a way that's very consistent with our longstanding pattern that kind of approaches really just about every topic under the sun in Alabama history.
So this wasn't some big Pride Month celebration or so. It was literally history and a discussion of that history.
That's right. Looking at primary sources in history, what's available about these efforts decades ago of people in Alabama. These were people who lived here, who were starting to create organizations within that community, and then looking at the lives of some notable Alabamians who happen to be LGBTQ and some of their contributions to society.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the questions I asked Senator Elliott is, isn't that part of our fabric? Isn't it part of our history? I mean, I understand there are some political issues there, ideological issues there, but that is a legit part of the fabric and conversation of Alabama history.
Well, it is, and we see that specifically within the realm of our historical work as one of the state's historical agencies. An opportunity to look broadly at the state's history and to be sure that we're serving all of Alabama's citizens, all of its taxpayers, in a way that means that, we cover a lot of territory in any given year. This 1 hour happened to be dedicated to this particular topic that we think is of legitimate historical inquiry. It wasn't about contemporary political issues.
Well, as you mentioned, you're talking about appropriations and specifically clawing back what the department received in the supplemental this past legislative session, some $5 million. Talk about that. But, at the same time, these are appropriators, and as you mentioned, they have authority, they have responsibility, and I guess you've got to somehow kind of find a way to make it work. Talk about where this money is supposed to go, as long as it stays in place.
Sure. The intended use is for some really exciting projects, one of which are some updates to our Museum of Alabama galleries. And I know you remember, we're coming up on a decade since Alabama Voices opened, our main permanent exhibition. We're working on a project now that does a few tweaks in there, but there's really other three primary parts to that project that includes a reworking of our Native American content in 2 different galleries. We're working on an entirely new military gallery that's going to allow us to make use of these phenomenal military collections that we have documenting the service of Alabamians all throughout its history.
Yeah, we have some photos here.
Yeah, this is kind of a working title of called Alabama Military Stories. It's going to be themed around three themes of service, community, and legacy. So about the direct service contributions of Alabamians in the military, but also thinking about the broader community implications for families, and even thinking about topics like our very important history as a host state for military bases here in Alabama. And then looking at legacy, some of the contributions of veterans to our society, but also looking at kind of the long-term consequences and sacrifices that veterans make in dealing with, associated with their service and associated with physical and mental health issues. So we see it as a flexible space that we're going to be able to change from time to time to tell lots of different stories about the contributions of Alabamians through military service. And then finally, a third major component is an all-new children's gallery. Many visitors to the archives are familiar with the hands-on gallery, which has been in place since the 1980s. We want to take a fresh approach to that to create a space where learning is possible through play, and very much aligned with our commitment to the idea that if we want our children to grow up effectively learning good social studies and history and civics, we need to start them in the early ages rather than kind of wait until the upper grade school years or even high school to really start kind of digging into some of those subjects. And we think we can do that by introducing these basic principles of social studies, history, and civics to our youngest visitors, so ages 2 to 9 and their families, in an environment that's going to be stimulating and fun, but a place where intergenerational learning can really happen. We're really excited about this project.
Yeah, I know I would have liked that when I was a kid, but I was a bit of a nerd. I know that I want to get to this because while we have time, we're working together, the Public Television and the Department of Archives. You're hosting a screening of a new APT documentary. Talk about this and when can we expect it?
Sure. We've enjoyed doing this periodically with APT over the years. It's a brand new documentary produced by Robert Clem for APT called Sink the Alabama. It's about the culminating battle in the Civil War with the CSS Alabama, storied naval raider associated with the state. That's going to be on Thursday, July 27th, and that'll be a free public screening. Before it airs on APT, you've got a chance to come see the movie in person and speak to the producer who's going to be with us. Mr. Clem will be there to talk about the project and to answer questions.
That's what, I love historical documentaries, and it's one of the best things about public television is being able to tell those stories in long form. So I'll certainly be there, but thanks again for coming on the show and explaining some of these issues.
Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
The Alabama Department of Archives and History was founded in 1901, becoming the nation's first publicly funded independent state archives agency. The archives identifies, preserves, and makes accessible records and artifacts of enduring historical value to the state. Thomas Owen founded the agency and served as its first director. He was succeeded by his wife, Marie Bankhead Owen, who headed the archives for 35 years and was the second woman to lead a state agency.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.